Back in 1999, a little horror movie came out by the name of The Blair Witch Project that took the world by storm. I remember watching it when I was a kid and honestly, I was spooked out. Then came the sequel and apart from that one hot goth chick, there was nothing going for that movie. I didn't know at the time that the studio behind the movie really tried to turn the Blair Witch Project in a franchise by exploring different mediums of storytelling, one of which were video games. There had been 3 games in the past and from what I could gather, the games were a bit disappointing. Fast forward to 2016 and it seems like the Blair Witch Project made a sort of comeback. Simply titled The Blair Witch, the movie can be best described as underwhelming. It seemed as if Blair Witch Universe will be put on the back burner once again until Microsoft showed off the Blair Witch game at one of their E3 press conferences. The trailer looked promising and it looked like it will be a refreshing take on the whole Blair Witch universe. I got the game long time ago when it was made available as a free game on Epic Game Store, but I never got around to playing it. Well, better late than never. I guess it's time I give my honest opinion on Blair Witch. Developed by Bloober Team, the same studio that made Layers of Fear, its sequel, and The Medium, Blair Witch was released as a timed exclusive on Microsoft's platform. It was later ported to PS4 and Nintendo Switch. For this video, I will be playing the game on PC, and if you think the game does not look crisp, it's probably because I'm running the game on my potato PC. And for those wondering how potato is my potato PC, well, I'm running an AMD Ryzen 5 1600 with 32GB of RAM and a GTX 1070 Turbo with 8GB of VRAM. Yeah, not the best setup I know, but this means I will be playing the game in 1080p with some custom configuration to get the game running at 60 frames per second or as close to it as possible. Now I will be going in head first in the game's storyline, so if you don't want any spoilers, jump to the timestamp shown on the screen right now. You have been warned. Blair Witch follows the journey of Alice and his trusty canine friend called Bullet. In the opening scene, when we are introduced to the main protagonist, we come to realize that Alice clearly has some issues, as implied by a special someone in his life named Jess.
Oh, wow. Okay. You think that's a good idea?
Why wouldn't it be?
You know why? You know what? Never mind.
Alice seems to be taking part in joining the search for a boy named Peter who has gone missing in the woods. Yes, the same damn woods from the movies. As the game progresses, we learn that Peter may have been abducted.
Is that? It's Peter.
I think I didn't see that, Peter. Ballsy move, kid.
Ellis to base. Peter didn't run away. He was kidnapped. I found a tape. It shows the man who did it.
As Alice goes deeper in the woods, his inner demons begin to manifest in front of his eyes. We see Alice's PTSD being triggered by the woods as he is forced to relive some of his worst moments in life.
The blood's still fresh. Some of those are defense wounds. Multiple cuts, probably a long blade.
Brown stuff hits the fan as dead bodies begin to pile up, and we are introduced to Carver, who seems to be the one behind the kidnapping.
You're far too weak, too scared. Your hands are trembling even now.
We are forced to run a few errands for Carver and eventually find ourselves in the same house as the movies when we learn the truth about Alice and what haunts him. Honestly, if you're someone like me who has spent most of his life watching or interacting with psychological horror media, you would see the big twist coming from a mile away. And yeah, I know I dropped a spoiler warning, but I really don't want to talk about it just in case you, my dear viewer, decide to give this game a go. But like I said, I found the story to be a bit predictable. The voice acting was believable and the conversation between Alice and Jess sounded organic.
You don't want to talk?
No. It's good to hear your voice.
Because Alice was by himself in the woods with no one to talk to but his dog, these little snippets of conversation between Alice and Jess really fleshed out the story and humanized both characters. On one end, we have Jess, a woman who wants to sort everything out between her and Alice, and on the other we have the main protagonist who wants to do the right thing.
Hey, as long as we're getting paid.
But the real star of the game has to be Bullet. I loved the dog, and I'm not even a dog person. And yes, you can pet Bullet and even customize it at the start of the game. There are 4 endings to unlock if you decide to replay the game. I managed to beat it in just a little over 6 hours, so it's not a long game either. Considering much of the game is you walking around trying to solve puzzles and avoiding enemies, I think 6 hours is a decent gameplay time. Speaking of which, the gameplay is rather basic. You will be walking around sometimes in loops until you come across something that you are required to do. It kind of reminded me of PT, and the way Bloober pulled it off is actually quite masterful. There was a time when I kept coming back to this white tree, and honestly I thought I was making the wrong turn somewhere, but turned out it was just careful level design and some trickery happening behind the scene that made me feel that way. I have to say that one part of the game captured the spirit of the movie very well, where you feel like no matter what turn you take, you will end up at the same place. I also have to hand it over to the developers for the atmosphere they created in the game. Being stuck in the woods at night is something I'm not comfortable with, and the developers really did a good job with creating some levels that are beautiful and haunting at the same time. You will constantly be on the edge as you walk down a path in the dark, with sounds of rocks being thrown around you or twigs snapping somewhere in the distance. At one point I took my headphones off to hear if it was happening in the game or in real life. The music, the sound effects, the atmospheric level design is truly top notch. I cannot stress that enough how important these 3 are in a video game, and Team Bloober nailed it. Thankfully you have your pet dog named Bullet by your side to keep you company as the world around you begins to make less sense.
Things would have been different if you... All this will never... I would never...
Now before I jump any further, I want to say this part of the game gave me PTSD. I had a nightmare of a time with a game called Blair Witch, and here I am playing a game about a witch with my trusty dog by my side named Bullet. Wow, the comedy practically writes itself. Anyways, Bullet is quite helpful. Not only he keeps Alice sane, he also points out items of interest in the environment. Bullet also assists in combat in the game. There will be times when you will come across these shadowy creatures that will circle around you, and the only way to fight them is with your flashlight. It is then you realize how important Bullet is to the game, as the good boy will begin to bark in the direction where the enemy is probably hiding or may attack from. At first, and I'm not going to lie, I had no idea how the combat was going to play in the game. At the end of the day, Blair Witch is more about what you don't know and how the woods, or rather what lurks in the woods, affects the main character. It is not a game where you whip out a handgun and start firing off to fight back. The whole idea of the game is to make you feel powerless as you rely on Bullet to help you out, and the combat sequences do just that. And when you do get in combat, you feel this sense of urgency that I must say I have not felt in a long time. The reason for that is maybe because there are not a lot of combat sequences in the game to begin with. Let me break this down for you. When you are playing a game like Resident Evil, you will come across zombies just about every other turn, and there will be a point in the game where you will master the combat system and dispense enemies with ease. Because Blair Witch does not have that many combat scenarios, you never feel like you have truly mastered it. As simple as it may be, it just catches you off guard as you walk down a dirt path uneasily looking for clues. And when the combat does happen, everything is amped up to 11. The music, the sound effects, the visuals, everything is taken to the next level. I mean, take a look at the footage yourself and you will see what I'm talking about. Just when I thought the game was beginning to feel a bit repetitive because all I was doing was walking from one point to another and waiting for a jump scare to happen, the developers included an amazing part in the game where I had to use a camcorder to navigate through a foggy part of the woods and avoid the creatures along the way. Once again, it was a nice touch, and it was a much needed departure in the game. Combat is a no-no at that point. All you can do is keep bullet close to you as you try to navigate through. The combat is simplistic and effective, and for those wondering why Alice can't use a gun, that's because of his PTSD. Speaking of which, there are parts in the game where Alice has to face the horrors of what he has been through. These levels are your standard nightmarish levels that you may have probably seen in these kind of games before, where the main character is tortured by images of his past. They offer a nice break, and some of these are genuinely disturbing, but it is nothing new. The game does have a neat trick up its sleeve, and that is the ability to manipulate time. Somewhere down the line you will get your hands on a camcorder and some tapes. You can pause, play, rewind, and fast forward footage to manipulate reality around you. This way you can clear out blocked paths and make items appear that Bullet can use to follow the scent.
Yeah, those tapes, they make things appear, but there's no time landing.
While there have been games in the past that lets you manipulate time, in Blair Witch it kind of feels right, and the whole camcorder thing is a nice homage to the Blair Witch movies. Graphically, the game is impressive. I'm playing the game in 1920 by 1080 and it still managed to impress me. I don't know how the game looks like on the consoles, but if the game looks impressive in 1920 by 1080, one can only imagine it on PS5, Xbox Series and high-end PCs. By now you might be thinking that Blair Witch might be a perfect 10 out of 10 game. Well, not entirely. There are some parts of the game that I want to address here. First up is the pacing. Yeah, I know the movies took time to get going, but when it came to the game, it sure took its time. You find some really neat ideas in the second half of the game, but in the first half, it is just you walking around trying to break the loop. The second criticism I have with the game is its final act. The part where you are in the house just seemed to go on forever. And while the developers did their best to introduce a new take on gameplay in that section, I won't spoil it, you have to see it for yourself, but by that time it was too little too late. Now, when I'm making an honest opinion video, I don't look at what critics have to say about the game I'm making my video on, but in this case I had to make an exception when I saw the ratings. I think I need to address some of the criticism that has been lobbed towards the game, and no, I will not be saying any names here. The four most common criticisms I found against the game were that it is buggy, the game was boring, Bullet was not utilized well, and the game did not escape the shadow of the movies. Well, I don't know how buggy the game was when it first came out, but in its current state in 2021, I encountered only one bug where Bullet refused to follow me no matter what command I gave. Simply quitting the game to the main menu and restarting from the last checkpoint sorted that out. While it is a bug in the game, I need to mention here that from my 6+ hours of gameplay, I encountered only one bug. If this was a Bethesda or a Fallout game, my bug counter would have been in double digits. Some critics called it boring, and while I would say the first half was definitely a slow burner, the game picks up and changes its approach to enemies and the way you encounter them in the second half. It kind of makes me wonder if those critics actually played the game through. The game really picks up the pace, and in the second half, more than I expected. For the critics that complained that Bullet was not utilized well in gameplay, I would say that the story is more about Ellis and his personal demons. Bullet is just there to accompany the main character, sort of like his crutch, as his support. Ellis has PTSD and he needs Bullet by his side to keep him calm. A point further elevated in later parts of the game when Bullet is not by Ellis's side and his PTSD gets worse. There are parts in the game where Ellis can issue commands to Bullet to investigate or fetch items, but the good boy is there to create an emotional connection between the player and Ellis, which I think the game does perfectly. Ellis is mentally broken and we are looking at the world through his eyes, and Bullet is the only thing that's keeping Ellis from breaking down. As for the game not escaping the shadow of the movies, the game is called Blair Witch. It's based on the movies. If it deviated from the material in the movies, then it would not be a Blair Witch game. Obviously, the game is trying to appeal to the fans of the movies and newcomers alike, but I don't think it would be a smart idea to deviate from the original source material and piss off the fans of the movies. And yeah, I can make a whole video on that one point alone, but I think I made my point. At the end, I'm going to say that Blair Witch is a solid experience. Yes, the story is predictable, the first half of the game can feel a bit boring, and the final act just went on forever when it could have been a more tighter experience. But even after all that, I would still recommend the game. Other alternatives for narrative-driven gameplay I would recommend are Alan Wake and White Knight, which I have covered in one of my previous honest opinion videos. Blair Witch is available on PC and consoles for around £25. I would recommend it, just not at that price considering you can finish the game in 6 hours, and because the game is very narrative driven, when you see it once, you have seen it all. Alright guys, that's enough from me. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like, and if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. I'm a part-time YouTuber, so your engagement with the channel will help me a lot in the long run. Peace out angels, and stay awesome.